is the French setup. And again, they have some limitations. The French has a decent army, as you can see here. It has a lot of 2-3s. That's a decent army. And I just put them in the whole front row here. I don't want to give the Germans any inkling of chance to think they can get Paris. The entire front row is backed by 2 rows. Because remember, of the exploitation breakthrough rule. If the Germans want to, they can come through Luxembourg, because nothing can set up there. The Belgian units are here. They can attack this hex, get their tanks next to the units that are doing the attacking on the breakthrough point, so the tanks would go back here, exploit them to this hex, and then attack out of that hex, but the farthest they can go is here, and then they're stopped. The French will be able to counterattack and probably cut them off, and we get builds, and we'll put them on Paris. So for the Germans to have to try to get through this double line, it's going to be very difficult. We do the same down here. I put a row of 2-3s on the Italian border because we don't want the Germans swinging around this way. To back up that, because if the Germans take a turn flip-flop, if they think they can get Paris, they're going to try it. The tank here backs up this hex, which is the closest hex to get to Paris. So I put a tank and a replacement there. That's guarding the rear of the infantry units. Because there's a rule. Any units that are hit by exploiting tanks, that means they're behind the line, they're really not getting expected to getting hit. Any infantry units hit by them are -1 defense multiplier. But armor units are not. So that's why it's an armor unit there. And it has zone of control, the ZOC, right? That -1 defense multiplier will not apply to infantry units if they're guarding a capital or Russian ICs. Now the air unit is located back here. It's out of German air range because you don't want the Germans to counter-air your aircraft. If the Germans can counter-air your aircraft, he takes it out of the battle and then he continues on what he wants. If he can't counter-air it, then we can try to put this air in a defensive air support role onto any hex we want. So we always keep it out of range, but at this point you can see it's within range of the entire French front row, basically. So wherever the Germans hit, this 5-4 can help protect it, including this area down here. Except for the last hex here. It can't cover this here. And it doesn't cover these up here. But basically, the heart of it is all covered by their 5-4 aircraft. The limitation setup is down in Africa. You have to put the North Africa corps here. And you got 2. One in Tunisia, one in Algeria, one has to go in Lebanon. I put a fleet there with Lebanon because remember, the invasion, the scare tactic to threaten invasion is key. So the French, remember, we're going for Belgium and Anglo-French cooperation. Anglo-French cooperation means the French can be used on the turn flip-flop to try to take Rome. So this 1-3 could be used, and that's why I have French fleet on it. And 2 French fleets are right there that can be used as shore bombardment. So the French are ready to go and ready for the German onslaught. Discuss the supply real quick. The supply rules is that every unit has to be supplied on the European board to a supply source. That supply source is usually the capital. For the British, it's London. And then there's some other rules that say, of course the Americans can carry supply in to help the British, but the French is right here at the capital. So what the Germans try to do when they break through with their tanks is they run around the back end and they try to cut off all the supply to the units. And if the units can't resupply themselves, they all die without the Germans having to attack them. So that's what we're going to watch for when we go into the battle here with the French, is supply. Now the British Empire, they list you everything they have for the global war game right here. This is everything they have right here and here. But remember the scenario book, the rule book I showed you in the beginning. You look here and they have a lot of deployment limits they have to meet. These forces, of their starting forces, these amount, which I exchange and use the Asian Army units, all have to start on the Japanese side. And I'm not going to set up the Pacific side yet. We're just dealing with the European side. So what's left is what we have over here, and then there's deployment limits here. Now, the most important thing I like to do to deal with first is up here in England. You can see there's not much here. The Germans have 233s loaded, and they'll usually do that. When they try to invade England, I have 3 separate fleets here, 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 and here. And the reason I spread my fleets out is so I get 3 different interception rolls at the Germans. And one of them is going to succeed 100%. And when it succeeds in intercepting the Germans, there's going to be a battle, and the Germans will lose one of those 3 3s. And therefore, 133 will only be able to invade England. Why will they lose it? Because to seaborne invade, you need 3 times the amount of ships to carry your troops. So the Germans, to carry a 3 infantry, it's 3 times 3 is a 9. It takes a whole 9 fleet. So 1 9 fleet, the Germans have 2 fleets. 1 9 fleet has to carry 1 3 infantry. The other 9 fleet carries the other 3. Well, when they sell and you get into a naval battle and the Germans have to lose 1 ship or 2, that knocks that ship down from a 9 to, let's say, an 8 or a 7. Now, can it carry that infantry anymore? Because that infantry needs a 9 fleet. No, it cannot. Therefore, the infantry is eliminated, leaving him 1 infantry to continue on. Now, besides that, I have a 5-4 aircraft up here that can also strike the fleets. And aircraft shooting the fleets are pretty effective too. So the best he can do is get 1 German 3-3 infantry on here, and I can deal with that. I'll let him go for it.
Now let's cover 1 hex islands, or 1 hex islands with ports. And this is Scapa Flow in Britain. I like to keep a 9 up here for several reasons. One of them, it's an island with a port. The Germans can invade it. However, a rule is if you have a 9-factor fleet, which a 9-factor fleet can base in a 1 hex island, or of course you can put 36 factors in a port. So no invasion can take place at a 1 hex island or a port if there's 9 fleet factors there. You have to eliminate the fleets first, then invade. So that's why I keep a 9 right there. The only thing that can take out that 9 easily would be a paratrooper, and there's no paratrooper around. So the only way to reduce that is if the Germans can fly aircraft over there and bomb it. Well, they have nowhere to reach that. So that, as long as you keep 9 fleet there, the Germans will never be able to invade it. Now let's take a look down here in southern England. You can see the beach areas are shaded brown. Those can all be invaded by invading armies. The ports here you see, Great Yarmouth, Harwich, they are not beaches. They can't be invaded. But the Germans, when you invade a country, you want to capture ports so you can start SRing or sea transporting troops into them. And you can see Portsmouth is a double port. The Germans can just invade right out on that and start SRing into them. However, SR rule. So the general rule is the Germans have the airborne unit right away. They have ships and power. They can invade a beach. The airborne unit with air power can probably take a port. However, the Germans won't be able to SR into that port if you put a unit next to the hex next to it. The Germans are going to have to wait a turn and then sea transport in next turn. So the British will get 1 turn, and all they have to do is retake that port or kill that airborne unit that landed. So that's what you do. You defend not the beach, but you defend behind it.
In the Gibraltar, we have deployment limits. You have to keep a 1-4 aircraft there and 2 fleets. But I go ahead and put our 4-5 tank and our 3-4 infantry there. Putting a tank and an infantry here with the ships gives me an invasion force, in case I want to take a turn flip-flop and take Rome. Okay, so that's why that's set up with extra troops. In Malta, there's a deployment limit. You have to have a 1-4 aircraft, 5 submarines, and a 1-3 infantry. I go in and put another 3-4 infantry on Malta because eventually I'm going to have 2 3-4s there. So I just start 1 because I don't want to lose Malta.
In Egypt, you have deployment limit. You have to start a 1-3 Egyptian Corps. You have to start the 9 fleet, a 2-4 aircraft, and a 2-5 tank. And I got them all in Alexandria. Then in addition to that, I add a 3-4 infantry to put on the front line. Now the Quad of Depression is impassable if the hex side is fully covered by the Quad of Depression. So the Italians can actually walk in the first hex. So the Italians can move 2 in, 1 up, and then across. Okay, but once they come here, they cannot move across these hexes. So you can't go straight through the bottom. So they have to go up and around. So with this setup, remember the Italians have to set up first. And if you see this setup, I don't care if the 1-3 just walks in and around. I have enough forces to take him out, and he would have to declare war on me to do that, and that would hurt him on the U.S. Axis tension table. It would I wouldn't have to declare war on Rome if I wanted to take a turn flip-flop and take Rome. It would cause problems for him just to walk in that infantry. Now, of course, if he set up tanks down there, I might have to get the 2-5 tank I have in Alexandria and move him up to the front to block that. But you get to see how he sets up. But I would not, of course, rather move that 2-5 tank. I keep it on the port in Alexandria because I want an invasion forces ready to go in case Rome is set up weak and I can take Rome out on the first turn.
So now we not only have French ships here loaded, British ships there loaded, British troops there loaded. We're ready to go anywhere we want around Europe. We can take a turn flip-flop, try to hit Rome, or we can send them all to France to help out France. So that's why they're all loaded on ships that way. Now you have to start a 1-3 infantry unit in Palestine, and you have to start a 1-4 aircraft in Iraq. So it's on an airbase in Baghdad. But eventually I get it out of there too. Actually, I exchanged the 1-3. I put the 1-3 over there, and the 1-4 I take it out when the game begins, because leaving troops in Iraq helps me on the diplomatic table, because we don't want the Germans to get Iraq either. So I'll show you all that later. But that's the British setup. With the Russians, they basically have an easy setup. The Germans ain't really going to do nothing to them. Protect Leningrad. You know, you never know what someone can come up with or what rules you miss. And make a straight line. You don't have to put one behind the lake there. All the way down. As you can see, I put the stronger 2-3s down here with some tanks in range. The planes are protecting the north, but they can stage. Remember, that's moving. They can move 8 hexes in the movement phase and find a new base. They can stage down here to take Bessarabia, because the BRPs that the Russians can grab, like the Germans are doing, is right there in the Finnish border hexes, 5 BRPs. The Baltic states, 10 BRP or 15 BRPs. Eastern Poland, 10 BRPs, and Bessarabia, 5 BRPs. Now, if the Russians were to do all that, it would hurt them on the Axis tension table. We don't want to give the Axis any more power on that table to keep Russia out of the war. So the only ones I do is Eastern Poland for sure, and then I might do Bessarabia, because just believe me, every hex counts in Russia when it comes to the Germans exploiting through your lines and cutting off your troops and trying to get deep into Russia. But remember this, the war in Russia is won and lost in the north. You don't let the Germans take the north. That's Leningrad or Moscow. You hold on to that at all costs. You let the Germans march as far as they want in the south. Okay, so that's the goals. So their setup is with stronger units down here in case I want to attack that, and the Romanians decide to defend it. Now, would the Romanians defend it? I say just put very little, because guess what? The Germans have to buy those Romanian units back, and they don't have the money for it. And when you go to get the Romanians on your side as an ally in the diplomatic table, any unbuilt units go against you. So don't put up a big fight if the Russians choose to take that. Now the Russians have to start some units in Asia, and here they are. So far the British are starting that much amount. The Russians are starting that much. As far as the two fleets go, if you put them here in Leningrad, the aircraft eventually bomb them, and you start losing the fleet. So I always put them down in the Black Sea. You don't need them up there. You can use them very effectively down here when you start invading the Balkans. See this beach right here in Romania? Because the Germans will have a line stretching across here eventually, and they'll be holding you back. Well, you try to come around the end here on a beach, so that's what the ships are good for down in the Russian industrial centers. It's the only country that has one, that has these industrial centers, and from now on we will call them ICs. These ICs have their own rules. This is how Russia builds its basic resource points. It has no system in place for any natural resources to gather. It was all based on industry, and Russia was good at breaking down these industries and moving them to the rear of the country, rebuilding them, and keep producing products. So whenever a German unit comes within 5 hexes of a Russian IC, the Russians may SR that IC to a new city to the rear of Russia. To do that, it costs SRs equal to the production value of the IC. The ICs in 1939 are worth 10 BRPs. And then they go up additionally from there, and I'll tell you what they are when they go up. Now, there's certain industries that can't be moved. The one in Moscow, the one in Leningrad, and the one in Grozny. Okay, those cannot be moved. All the others can. So the Germans, I like to, look out, pay attention to how close you're coming to a Russian IC. If you get within 5 hexes of it, but you can't capture it, then the Russians can move it. So you either stay 5 away until you're sure you can capture it, or you just go for it and make the Russians lose SRs moving it. Now you would think right away, well, we'll just start moving all our industries back in the beginning of the game as soon as they become within 5 hexes of German units. But the drawback is you will immediately lose the BRPs that you received for that industry for that year. So you move it when you have to, and if you can't afford the BRP loss right away, you may just leave it and let the Germans capture it. Or you can just destroy it, but you still have to lose the BRPs for it. The Germans, once they capture it, they can hold on to it and they get half the production value, or they can destroy the IC. So the ICs work a little differently here for the Russians. And as the game play goes on, we will show you how those work. The American setup over in Europe is simple. You follow the force pull setup, and that's what it gets to start with. And you put it right in the United States box for the Atlantic side. On the Pacific side, that's what starts in the Pacific side in the US box, and you put it in the box. There's deployment limits for Pearl. So you got Pearl, Midway Island, Wake, down here. So you just set up all the deployment limits, and I don't change anything. In the Philippines, this is how I set it up. What this does is, I think, make the Japanese take 2 turns to take the Philippines, and that's what we want. Remember, it's just like the Germans in Europe. You want to make them pay and use as many forces as he has to take that. Now, I played a game against the Japanese person that didn't even bother taking the Philippines. They left it alone, and they only came in the bottom part where these 2 ports are, and they took them. and they based their task force there. And they used that to protect the southern part of Indonesia. But he always had about 4 infantry corps there, so I don't see why he wouldn't just take the Philippines if you're going to keep infantry corps there, to get the 10 PRBs, and keep the 4 infantry corps around there and deal with partisans. So that's what he did. And I actually got him because I traced supply to Manila, and once Manila had supply, I was able to run submarines for strategic warfare out into this waterway, right where his shipping went from the oil resources up to Japan. And I really hammered him. For 2 turns I took BRPs from him until he isolated Manila and cut it off.
So let's take a minute and talk supply in the Pacific here. Just like the European side, every piece has to be supplied from some supply source. In the Pacific, most likely it's going to come from the western edge of the map board by the US through Hawaii, and then it can travel across water. As long as it touches every 10 hexes it goes through a supplied port, it can keep traveling along. And in this game, basically every unit's supplied. It's up to your opponent to say, hey, is this unit supplied? Where is it being supplied from? And then you have to show them the route. So to use our example, the guy who isolated Manila, he did not take Guam from me. Now Guam is at the bottom part of this picture. You can't really see it, but he didn't take that, and he did not take Wake Island. So when the SW phase came around, I mentioned to him that my submarines were going to use Manila as a supply base and cut off the oil from the Japanese. And he didn't realize that I can trace supply from Hawaii to Wake to Guam to Manila. So in this game, submarines are very effective on this board, not like the European side. And you keep track of the opponent's supply lines and where their supply routes are, so you can cut them off.
Anyways, that's what I think the setup should be. All the rest of the setup I went ahead and did here in India for the British. Now, if you ever look in the General magazine on the Pacific Empire of the Rising Sun, they set up the Pacific for you just like this, and that's just what I copy. I copy his setup because it's a good setup, and it covers your objectives, and it makes the Japanese fight for every piece of land, and he prevents the turn flip-flop from losing things, because remember, the Japanese will get a turn flip-flop. There's nothing you can do about it. In 1941 to 1942 he gets 2 turns in a row. So these setups make the Japanese not take something so easily and makes them fight for it. He won't get Singapore in 1 turn. This is India's setup right there. That's guarding the gateway to northern India. Ceylon has the carrier with a 2-2 Indian infantry on it, on Colombo. 2 Indian units are right there in Malaya. On Singapore is a 3-2 infantry and a 9 fleet. The Indonesian, the Dutch, they have to have setup limits, so the 1-2s are all on the capitals. The fleets and the aircraft are right here. I got a 1 fleet there with a 1-3 plane and a 1 fleet there. Australia is like this. 1-3 aircraft, 3-2 infantry, and 4 ships. On Cairns, 2 ships, a 1-3 aircraft, and a 2-2 infantry. 2-2 infantry at Port Moresby, 1 on Rabaul, 1 on Guadalcanal, and 1 out here on Suva on another objective. So that's the Australian setup. The Russian setup, I really don't have a exact way of setting it up. I'm just preventing the Japanese from getting to that objective right there. So you can see I have units in zone of control strung out across Mongolia, And there's the other objective he can take, and I stack it with 2 infantry and some planes. And then I just occupy these 2 cities, because cities will become very important to the Japanese for their air basing. There's really nowhere I can put that ship, so I just put it in the farthest port I can. And then at 1-2, I block the Japanese from walking across right there. So that's the Russian setup.
Now the Japanese setup. Now the Japanese strategy can be the first obvious one. Try to take Pearl Harbor. Try to take Australia. Try to take India, or attack Russia. And we've already discussed most of those except Pearl Harbor, and I'll get into Pearl Harbor when we go to attack it. But I've already discussed Australia, India, and Russia, and we're going after Russia. So while we do that, we need to make sure we take the South Pacific over. We're going to attack Darwin, as I already stated, and then we're going to try to put up a barrier against the Americans with the islands out in the Pacific. But in the beginning of the game, the Japanese have to deal with China, and here's what we do. You see the gray dotted line here? That's northern China. The communists have to set up north of that line, and they have Yan'an as their capital. I put 2 2-2s on that for the communists, and then you put the 2-2 on the next line, and the 4th 2-2 on the next line. Now they can rebuild 1 corps every turn, and they can take offensives, free offensives, and try to take 1-to-1 against the Japanese. Now if they lose more than 1 unit a turn, they can only get 1 back. It starts leaving gaps in their line, and I can start moving Japanese units around the sides on the mountains and get on the 21 attrition table. But right now I just start on the 11 attrition table. I got a 2-2-1-2, 2-2-1-2, a 3-2-1-2, and a 3-2-1-2. That's how I set up. The 3-2 isn't going to stay there long. I'll just end up with a 2-2 there. But I'll be on the 11 attrition table. That means every turn I'm going to kill a communist unit, and then he'll get it back. If I get lucky and get a 1 or a 2, I'm going to kill 2 communist units and even get a hex. So that's what we do against the communists. And if they try to take 1-to-1s on me and miss, or get exchanges, they're going to lose a lot of men, so I wouldn't mind that. Now, the next thing is the Chinese nationalists and communists can build partisans. So I set up my tanks to keep zone of controls all over China. You can't build partisans in zone of control. You see the 1-3 up there north of Peking? That's actually in Manchuria. You have a deployment limit in Manchukuo, or Manchuria they call it, and I put a tank right there, and the 4 hexes around that tank have zone of control, and he can't build partisans. Now you see the 2 1-2s I have over there? Well, there's no zone of control that reaches there, so I have to put 2 1-2s there. So you can see this whole northern area is protected by zone of control or units. He can build no partisans up there. Now this is the line against the nationalist Chinese, and you can see on the right I have a 3-2 and a 1-2 and a 3-2 and a 1-2. Those are objective hexes. I do not want the Chinese taking those back, so I keep 4 factors on them, backed up by the 5-3 aircraft. So if the nationalists ever try to take an offensive or limit offensive, it's to take those objective hexes, and they can get 1-to-1 on me. But if I put an airplane there on each one, then it's a 1-to-2. And again, I'll take them odds. Now the Japanese have 5 3-2s to set up. 1 has to go in Manchuria. I just showed you there was 2 against the communists, and then I got 2 here against the nationalists. Now eventually I'll take 2 of those 3-2s out of this Chinese area and send them to other parts of the front when I go to war. But right now I don't want those objective hexes taken. Now you can additionally see another tank sitting here, and under the 5-3 there's another tank. So I have zone of control in this whole area. There's no way he can build partisans, so I keep it like that. I get no partisans I have to deal with, and I'm protecting my objective hexes, and I'm protecting against the communists. This can be a real nightmare here in China, so this is why I do this. Then you have the beachheads. There's two beachheads that the Japanese took. One of them, Fu Chao, it's not an objective. So I just put a 2-2 and a 1-2 there. If the Chinese want to take that from me, go ahead. You can see the two naval aircraft. They're just there to protect in case they try to do attack there. I put a little defensive air support. When the Chinese get their flying tigers, though, I'll move those naval aircraft out of the way. Now this beachhead is Canton, next to Hong Kong here. This one I do want to hold, so I put 3 1-2s and a 2-2 there to make sure he can attack it and take it. So, and remember, bridgeheads or objectives can never be taken by attrition, so he has to attack them. Now, as far as, to me, the most important hex in China is the 2-2. You can see the Chinese 2-2 right between the Japanese objective hexes, because if the Chinese set up 2-2 units there, 2-2 units to the left, and 2-2 units to the right, he can get 1-to-1 on those objectives. Now, of course, I already showed you I can put aircraft in there and reduce it down, but it's a important hex for the Japanese. If they simply take that hex, then the Chinese can't threaten those hexes at all. So it's that hex right there I would like to take eventually. Now, because of the tension tables, the Japanese can't, bomb China and take offensives here in China. They're really going to rack up the U.S.-Japanese tension table and bring in, and create problems for themselves. So I don't take any full offensives, maybe one, and I determine the time to do that. I might take one limited offensive or two, but the rest of the time it's just attrition. But when I choose to take that full offensive, because I'm going to need one full offensive to take that Chinese hex I'm talking about where the 2-2-2s are, and then take that out, and I will own it, and then it's up to the Chinese to try to get it back. So that's the plan for the Japanese. The whole plan there is for that hex in China. So that is the Japanese setup, what it looks like. Now you're going to feel this inclination to attack the Chinese and really go after them and take another objective city, but don't do it. It's just a trap. Now, out in the Pacific, I'm building a barrier, so I build defense there. In the East Carolinas on Truk, I put 1-1-2. The other 1-2 that's in the East Carolinas there on Panape, that's incorrect. Don't do that. But the other 1-2 you see in Kawajuan, put that one there. And then on Marcus Island, which is to the north a little, put the other 1-2 there. So there's 3 1-2s that you'll have out in the ocean. Truk, Kawajuan, and Marcus. Another thing on setup, I put an airbase right there on Iwo Jima. That way you can transfer your airplanes from Japan to Iwo Jima to islands all the way across the Pacific and get them out to the front very easily with an airbase there. So that's why I do that. Everything else goes in Japan, and you have ships there and stuff, because as you lose units in China, yes, arm back in, or we start beefing up the defense in the islands. And the last setup is in Manchuria, and there's deployment limits for it. You have to put 1-2-3 armor, 1-1-3 armor, and I already showed you using that 1-3 for that zone of control, 1-3-2, 2-2-2s, and 2-1-2, and 5 Army air factors. It's those 5 Army air factors I hate to have to leave in there, but that's what you got. So if you just see Manchuria here up around Russia, there's really no setup I have here that matters. There's 2 capitals in there. You put the Japanese units on the capitals. You put the 5-3 aircraft on one of the cities, and you set the infantry units around it, and that's it. So that's what the Japanese setup looks like. And remember, hold off on doing too much in China. It's going to kill you. Do very, very little there, but attrition, keep the partisans off the board. Now, one thing you will do is in 1940, at the end of the year, when the Germans take France, you're allowed to walk into French Indochina. So you'll get units, a couple 1-2s prepared to occupy that, because you are going to eventually hit Burma here, and you'll build more forces there, or you can go into southern China and cut off the Lido Road. So that completes our global war setup. And now the game is ready to start.